trying to do here with this webinar. So I will look at sector by sector and look at where the performance is so that we know at least what has been going strong that we can build on. And then when we have areas where things are not going strong, what we need to do to learn from that. So in terms of public expenditure, I'll just have a series of graphs to comment on. In terms of economic growth, GDP across Africa during the last 20 years, as well as GDP per capita, have grown strongly. Average GDP has doubled and GDP per capita has gone up by 1/3, which is very different from what happened during the 3 decades preceding the Caadp era. During the same time as well, countries have doubled nearly annual outlays for agriculture from around $10 billion to close to around $17 billion annually. And agriculture's expenditure as a ratio of agricultural GDP, agricultural value added as well, has gone up from around 200 billion to more than 400 billion. So there's been both on the expenditure side in absolute level and level of efforts, there's been a significant increase. And so also in terms of agricultural growth, there have been the really longest, most sustained period of growth. You will have to go back to the 1960s to see something like that in Africa. And we also know that the 70s and 80s agriculture badly stagnated or even declined in many African countries. So there's been a real change during the Caadp years. And those changes actually led to something that happened for the first time. Maybe in the 60s it did, but really for the first time during this last 20 years, that Africa's agriculture sector was the fastest growing in the world. Actually, if you were to go back to the 80s and 90s and 70s, the line at the bottom will be the African line, not the red line on the top, right? Some people will say it's a small, you're starting from a small base. The base was even smaller in the 1980s and 70s, and African rice was at the bottom. So there's some vigor that has been seen in Africa's agricultural sector in the 2000s. Which is encouraging and a good base to build on for Kampala as we move forward. During the same period, again, something that didn't happen in the 30 years preceding the onset of Caadp, both labor productivity and land productivity more than doubled over these 20 years. There is, again, some momentum, some energy that we can build on. When we look at all these outcomes, the idea that should actually be in people's minds shouldn't be the outcomes themselves, but what did we do differently on the ground? Why did this happen in the last 2 decades and did not happen 2-3 decades prior? And what are the lessons to be drawn from there, right? And here, in terms of trade, there were also ambitions there. Africa's global agricultural exports, as well as intra-African actual trade, have both expanded by a factor of 2.5 times through those 20 years again. Again, here is a clear departure from what happened prior to the last 20 years. So there is momentum somewhere. There has been progress that we can learn from and build on as we look at Kampala. The last 2 areas I will look at will be poverty and nutrition outcomes. As you can see, there's been a steady decline of hunger, stunting, and wasting. Those who are following this story just over the last 10, 15 years or so perhaps may not know that these lines were trending upwards prior to the last 20 years. So in particular in the 80s and 90s, for many of us, if you remember, Africa struggled to meet the MDGs because when the MDGs started, Africa was still trending downwards and then started trending upwards maybe 5 years into that period or so. So this time, over a 20-year period, the trends have kept their direction and downward movement. Again, what happened, what's behind it, and how can we learn from it as we do Kampala? So that all looks very encouraging. It looks like there is an environment where positive change has taken place and could continue to take place, and that we have to figure out what were those factors that help us sustain this progress and be able to learn from that for Kampala. But there are also warning signs, which I think we need to be very, very much aware of as we do Kampala. If you look at GDP per capita, it has just expanded, as I said. But if you look at it here, there's a sign of stagnation, both in terms of GDP per capita. You see that how it flattens and slows down if you compare here 5-year periods, early 2000s and the last 10 years. Agricultural value added growth rate in agriculture has decelerated in the last 5 years as well. So if these trends continue, then we will not have the next decades or two looking like the last 2 decades. And these are things we really need to pay attention to. We shouldn't wait until we're in a crisis mode again. It is now when these signs are coming up that we need to pay attention. And what this will require for Kampala, we'll discuss later, but we'll need more in-depth domestication than just lip service in many cases. We'll have to be strategic about how we do the domestication. Despite absolute levels of agricultural expenditure, the level of the share of agriculture expenditure has just remained low and has been actually declining. Okay, yes, we have spent a lot more on agriculture, but it's because we have a lot more money, but we're not paying a lot more attention to agriculture. That's what these two numbers are telling us, right? We're spending a little bit more just because of a little bit more, right? But are we really making a conscious effort to do really the right things by agriculture? Even if somebody can contest the share of public expenditure in total budget, because you can say, well, what is your rationale to say it should be 10 or 15 or 20? Maybe that could be debated. But shouldn't we be giving back to agriculture as much as it gives us? Shouldn't the share of agriculture expenditure as a ratio to agricultural value added at least should be constant or expanding? We should be turning back to agriculture and investing in the sector, and we're not doing that. So, and that is something that needs to really change in the Kampala. If you would like to regain the momentum and sustain it, we have to look at how we get this public expenditure, public investment back into agriculture, in addition to the options that Dr. Mayaki talked about. Our pension funds, our central banks, the private sector, there are other sources to mobilize funding for agriculture in the private sector, but the government will have to do something more. Inter-African trade and agriculture trade in general, yes, this has expanded rapidly, but again here, we're seeing the same signs of stagnation and basically interrupted pace of vigor. Again here, the last 20 years have been strong, but the signs are that the next 10 years or so will be much weaker if we don't do something. And Kampala will have to pay attention to this. Dr. Mike again talked about the regional economic communities, how we can boost trade. And here in the post-globalized world, regional trade, African markets will be very important, but also perhaps closer markets up north towards Europe and maybe opening up to the east. But definitely there's going to be a need here for regional economic communities, for countries, to look into ways of sustaining the growth in agricultural trade in a post-globalized world. FAO has shown that despite all the progress, prevalence of malnutrition is about to go up again. And we see here that the prevalence of undernourishment has stopped falling and has a little uptick. So there too, especially in this area, has Kampala quite a lot to do, right? Even when we are having these stronger indicators in other areas, we had a change in the direction of falling prevalence of undernourishment much earlier than the other indicators. Something must be going wrong, right? It shouldn't happen. You may have a luck, maybe. The economy go a little bit poorly at some point, agriculture a little bit slow down in income, and then you see malnutrition going up, right? Undernourishment going up. But here it started quite earlier. So there's an issue there that growth was not translating immediately and fully to reducing undernourishment. And these are things we need to look at. And then we have to make sure that these trends continue to go downward and not to stop, and let alone coming back upward. So there are real issues there that we need to deal with. So, and a real warning sign. So what are the lessons for Kampala? First of all, I have 5 lessons here, or 4. Lessons number 1, we have to be more granular in thinking about Kampala and how to combine both ambitions and actual progress on the ground to lead each and every country and regional bloc in terms of what they do. So we need to look at the BR outcomes, acknowledge them, but go beyond that to unpack country and regional trajectories over the last 20 years, just like we try to do here. So we have more granularity, and we're looking at where progress is taking place and then be able to build on that. We need to identify the strengths and the weaknesses that we have in each country and region to advancing agri-food system transformation. And once you understand that, as we unpack Kampala at the country and regional level, in the investment plan or whatever we call them, we'll have a much better chance of a successful agenda. We need to recapture the momentum. As I said, there's a second lesson. There has been a real turnaround in the 2000s compared to the stagnation of the 80s and 90s. So the engine is on again and the car is running, right? But there are several key performance indicators that have started to plateau or even declining trend. So there's something happening with the engine, with the car, right? It cannot win a race with those warning signs that are emerging. So we need to take a good look, have a mechanics take a good look at this car and see why are these dials pointing to some problems with the car itself as a whole, as a system. And this actually really has to take place at individual country level in individual priority areas, right? So that you can have the kind of granularity. When we went from Maputo to Malabo to Kampala, we're refining the agenda, and therefore average understanding of things and worse, even conventional wisdom will fail. We have to be also in a position to be more granular, more refined in our thinking and the approach in our planning, so that we can deal with the Kampala agenda, right? But bottom line is every country, every region should really work on effective implementation of Kampala so that we can accelerate the pace of progress and put us back onto the trajectory of higher and faster growth and goal realization across the different areas. Number 3, effective domestication and alignment is extremely important. So the Maputo agenda, after this political call by Africa's leadership, was guided by very clear, well-articulated steps for implementation that made it possible to know that a country is indeed domesticating and has domesticated, right? The Malabo domestication were a little bit looser. They focused much more on awareness raising and sensitization and the like, right? So I would think that Kampala could learn more and emulate Maputo modalities which include robust evidence to inform and guide consultations, inclusive roundtables that were held in close to 30 countries. And actually, this evidence looked at taking stock of where the country were, benchmarking them against the Maputo goals and targets, identifying key priorities and the like, and then partnership modalities. And all of those were put on the table during roundtables that brought all key stakeholders to review these priorities, to agree on them, to set up mutual accountability and review processes, and to agree on partnership modalities. There was that systematic approach to Maputo, and I think we could get back to that. And this domestication process actually ended with a formal outcome in the form of a compact signed by government, regional economic communities, development partners, non-state actors, including the private sector. Okay, and this compact was basically a blueprint, a roadmap that not only documented domestication, but also said, what does domestication mean for a given country? In the declaration, heads of state are calling on each country to reflect Kampala in their policies, strategies, and budget allocation. And I think a Maputo-like process should lead to a document that is adopted at the end of the consultation process, whether roundtable or something else, that is inclusive at the country level. And that document should ideally elucidate how the Kampala Declaration will be reflected in the country's policies, strategies, and budget allocation. It could be a roadmap, could be an action plan, could be whatever one calls it, but a good indication of that you can put your hands on. One step I don't have here, which was also very crucial, is after the compact signing, countries then decide the investment plan and organize a business meeting to review and vet that business plan. So there was really the systematic approach, the clear step that clarified what domestication means is extremely important, and it will be good to have something like that in Kampala. We're trying to see how that could be piloted in Kenya and in Togo, as I said earlier in my statement. And once we get lessons there, we'll be happy to share it. The evidence-driven approach is extremely important. Actually, Caadp's longevity and credibility has a lot to do with its embracing of data-driven way of doing business, openness in mutual accountability processes, right? And inclusivity to bring everybody on board. And I think as we move forward to Kampala, we will have to keep that same and then learn again from both Malabo and Maputo. So good for countries to start with assessing their status vis-a-vis these Kampala priority areas and targets. Knowing exactly where you stand vis-a-vis each and every one of them allows countries to take stock better and know actually the amount of efforts that will be expected from them. They will need to find a way of evaluating what is possible over the next 10 years and define clear milestones to guide future action. And with the knowledge centers, they have the expertise at hand in the different countries, something like that should be possible. We've shown with the technical working group preparing the strategy that it's possible to mobilize these universities to work with countries and help. But more importantly, it's really important for these countries to use the local capacities they have, centers of excellence, to boost the capacities and generate review processes that allow to track performance as they implement the Kampala agenda. Finally, doing that will require filling the data gap. It's really going to be very hard to continue to refine policies, find the reasons of doing better and the ways of doing better if you don't improve the availability of data to allow policymakers to have a better feel of how the economy is doing and how agriculture in many different segments of the agri-food system change are doing. So the embrace of the biennial review and joint sector reviews by many countries has been a real achievement, right? This is really where Caadp has usually innovated. But they also have revealed that quite a bit remains to be done in terms of data quality and availability. So there is space, as I said, and scope to leverage much more proactively existing centers of expertise to raise data supply capacities in countries across regions. And there are also opportunities to innovate there. I think that especially in agri-food systems, geospatial data and AI advances could help boost the timeliness, granularity, and quality of data for African agri-food systems. We're already doing quite a lot at Academia 2063 in this area. We have a whole department just dedicated to this. And I also know that across Africa, universities are investing a lot in that. So that needs to be mobilized to get us to the next level in terms of data availability, timeliness, granularity, and quality. So I'll stop here and thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Usman, for that tour through the performance over the last period and for the presentation of opportunities and lessons that could be gained from going forward. Lots to be learned from 3 decades of working in 2 decades and working in this and looking forward to moving forward. So lots of work has been done over the last period and there's lots of lessons to be learned. So can we turn now to our panel, and we have some guests who will present some of their perspectives on what Usman has presented and also their lessons from walking the path through Caadp over the decades. So can I turn first of all to Dr. Maximo Torreiro, who's Chief Economist at the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, FAO. Maximo, we know that the Caadp agenda aims to achieve multiple goals at the same time. One of those is achieving food security and nutrition. And the Kampala Declaration includes a goal to achieve a healthy diet that's affordable and to achieve zero hunger. So quite a few challenges in today's complex world to be addressed all at the same time. So can you help us understand from the data over the 20 years of Caadp implementation, what you see as some of the priorities for steering the action in future?
No, thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you to Academia for the invitation. And thank you for the presentation of Usman. Let me go a little bit around the numbers, which I think help us a lot to understand the situation. And the situation is not so positive, at least in the metrics we measure. The first one is prevalence of hunger. So for Africa as a continent, we have 20.4% of African population, about 298.4 million people, face hunger in the latest number we have, which is 2023 in the SOFI 2024. And this is very high relative to the 8.1% in Asia and the 6.2% in Latin America. Africa accounted for 1 in 5 of the 733 million people worldwide who experienced hunger in 2023. And around 2.33 billion people face moderate or severe food insecurity, which is the other indicator that we measure. And of these, 864 million experience severe food insecurity, which is related also to the chronic undernourishment. Now, in addition, there is significant regional disparities and trends, and I think many of the data that Usman presented, it would be nice to have it at the sub-regional level, because there are enormous disparities. So in West and Central Africa, 14 billion people are currently struggling to secure enough food, with projections going to 52 million. In Eastern Africa, nearly 28 million people. So I think it will be important always to look at the disaggregation. Now, when we look to stunting prevalence, as of 2023, the prevalence of stunting among children under 5 in Africa is approximately 30.7%, significantly higher than the global average of 22%. And there is an historical progress. Since 2000, Africa has been seeing a gradual decline in stunting rates. However, the rates of improvement has varied across subregions, with Central, Northern, and Southern Africa experiencing a slowdown in recent years than before. So the subregional variations in Eastern and Southern Africa, the number of stunted children increased from 23.6 million to 26.8 million over the last past 25 years because of the slow rates of reduction in rapid population growth. So again, the regional variations are important. If we look at the cost of a healthy diet, which is another indicator that we follow, and this is because we want to assure that people get the diversity of micronutrients and macronutrients that they need to be able to move out of hunger, but especially to avoid under or overweight. The average cost of a healthy diet in Africa was 3.74 PPP dollars per person per day, up from 3.41 in 2021. And the increase, of course, reflects the increase in prices. But again, there are regional variations. In Northern Africa, 3.78, Eastern Africa, 3.79, Southern Africa, 3.97, Middle East Africa, 3.67, all of them PPP. And this indicates that the cost of a healthy diet varies across different regions, but it's also quite unaffordable at this point, and that's something to look. 924.8 million people in Africa were unable to afford this minimum cost healthy diet. And this represents a significant portion of the continent population and marks an increase of 23.9 million people compared to the previous year of what we report in the SOFI. Globally, we know the number is 2.8 billion people that were unable to afford a healthy diet, but Africa plays one of the biggest shares at the regional level on these factors. Now, this is kind of inconsistent on the other hand, when we look at the evolution, and I think the graphs that Usman showed at the beginning of the GDP growth and the productivity growth, it shows that between 2000 and 2010, we see an increase in growth from 5 to 6%. 2011 to 2014, there was growth remained strong, but began to show signs of a slowing due to declining commodity prices. Between 2015 and 2019, there was a downturn with growth rates going down to 2.5 to 3.5 because of the global uncertainties. And in 2020, of course, COVID-19 was the biggest shock, which shrink the GDP of Africa to 1.97%. And 2021 to 2023 was the expected recovery. No, that's why the rates at the end are 4.26, but that's relative to what was before. So in 2021, 4.26, and 3.66 in 2022, and in 2023, 2.96. And the projections are to have an average growth rate of 3.36% as mentioned, as simulated by IMF. So the reason why I'm bringing this contradiction, because there are some macro indicators which are showing progress, but the micro indicators are still not there, and that's a concern. I was looking even at the numbers for 2024, and things are not at the level of improvement that we will have expected, which we are seeing in Asia and South America, for example. So I think this brings up the fact that something is not connecting. So there is growth, but there is no growth with inclusion, which is affecting, of course, the hunger, and is affecting the agriculture and the agri-food systems. And that's where I think the post-Malabo and the way to track this is super important, and the efforts that Caadp is doing on data. I'm more than happy to collaborate on you on that as FAO, as a way, because we have to monitor and control data. So it will be great to accelerate that process, because yes, it's true that there's enormous gaps on data, especially on the more important nutrition indicators, which I assume Anna will speak about. But I think there has to be a big effort to do that. But there also has to be an effort to bring more evidence to explain why this percolation of the growth, no matter of the variations and the difference among regions, is not really percolating as the velocity that we need to have to get as close as possible, or at least to get to a negative trend in terms of hunger in the following years, so that we can get as close as possible to the target of zero hunger, which, of course, right now is close to unattainable, but it's something that we always keep pushing for the next 5 years until 2030. And that's where we need to understand which policies are working and which policies are not working, and how some countries are being successful. We know of countries that has been improving substantially, countries like Ethiopia, countries like Zambia, and many others. We need to learn from those and see how things are progressing there and why, and how the commitments could help to assure that, so that we can accelerate that and percolate that economic macro growth into a microeconomic growth. Now, and here I stop. The last point is, I think we are now in a breaking point because things will change after the measures that are happening right now. And things will change because the actions that are being taken are creating some trigger effects, which I feel are not temporary. I think trigger effects that will create some long-term effects. And this is more linked to the fact that Africa over the night lost around $7 trillion, including direct and indirect resources. And those $7 trillion, no matter if they were efficiently used or inefficiently used, it will create an impact. It will create an impact on health indicators, especially. It will create an impact on evolution of pests and diseases. I was yesterday in the pandemic fund discussions, and there is a lot of awareness of the potential pandemic issues that could be risen in the region. So there are structural things that will be impacted for sure. And those things we need to be aware. And I think it will be important a couple of months from now, or 3 or more months, to have a deep discussion on what that means in terms of the post-Malabo and the agreements and what needs to happen. And here is where I think I see it as an opportunity, is where Africa will need to change substantially in the way they operate and trying to find ways in which they can increase across the board efficiencies, and use their public resources in the most efficient way and attract private resources as much as possible to move an agenda with not necessarily the existence of the money that was there for granted in the last decades. No? So let me stop there and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Maximo. As professionals who have worked all our lives to try and reduce hunger, the numbers don't really make it encouraging at all. But FAO is doing quite a lot in this area. Can you give us some idea as to what actions FAO are taking that would support the Kampala Declaration?
Yeah, so FAO has been working together with academia and the African Union in this process, but we are taking a very action-oriented display. So one of the bigger initiatives that we have right now, which have significant shares in African countries, is the Hand in Hand initiative, where basically we are targeting countries and we're targeting areas and we are bringing investment. So we have now raised around more than, I think, $8 to $9 billion for African countries on investments, in the sense of trying to scale up interventions that we know are applied to areas where agriculture can really make a difference, like in South Sudan in rice, like in Ethiopia, in parts of the Transformation Agency actions in wheat and other commodities. And we are trying to accelerate that process in those countries. And the way it works is basically do concrete investment plans to resolve concrete bottlenecks driven by the countries and attract investment to that. We are coordinating that with the MDBs, with the IFC of the world and the African Development Bank to try to attract that so that we can also attract private sector investment. Then we are also thinking not only on the situation of today, so we are looking at the situation of tomorrow too. So yes, we can accelerate and increase productivity, total factor productivity of the agri-food system in Africa, in many countries where you have the scale to really grow fast. We are seeing how, for example, Zambia could recover from the drought period and again become a net exporting country, which it was before, but the drought basically moved them from that situation. Because they have larger scale, they have natural resources. We are seeing how Ethiopia is becoming self-sufficient in wheat and how they want to expand that, and how they finally have liberalized the financial markets, which will be very attractive to attract new investments. But we also need to see that this is done sustainably, meaning that we can keep creating these increases in productivity over time because we use our land and soil and water properly, no? And that's our roadmap of SDG 2 and 1.5. Basically, what we are trying to do is achieving the right to food today, so good food for all for today, but also for tomorrow. And that will require, which is similar to growth with inclusion, no? Will require maybe a smaller growth rate at the beginning, but which will assure a stable growth over time because your land and your water resources are going to be used in the most efficient way. The other issue that is a problem for Africa, I think, and explains many of the issues that we have is conflict. No, conflict and climate will be two dimensions that I think will be substantially important in the next years. And that what we're trying to do is helping the continent with early warning systems and trying to attract financing from the insurance system to be able to respond to this type of risks in an anticipatory way. So instead of waiting for the shock to happen, is to trigger the insurance with probabilistic models that will allow us to invest before, like 60 days before, 90 days before, which makes a huge difference. The return is 1 to 7, 1 to 8 of every dollar invested. So in summary, our goal is good food for all for today and tomorrow. And for that, we require to invest in resilience, which have capacity to respond today. So early warning systems, One Health approach, insurance systems, but then the capacity of absorption, which is the second component, because the shocks will happen. And that's where social protection through the Global Alliance Against Hunger and also investment in agriculture will make a big difference. So that's the way we're trying to work at this point.
Right, great, thank you. I guess the trick is really finding ways in which all of these investments can move the dial on nutrition, which is one of the elements that Caadp has struggled to do in the past. Thank you, Maximo, for your insights. We'll come back to you when we get to an open discussion. If I can move to Dr. Agnes Kalibata. Agnes, you've played multiple roles through the lifespan of Caadp. Especially you were the UN Secretary General's Special Envoy to the 2021 Food Systems Summit, and you've been the president of AGRA. I remember meeting you at the signing of the first Caadp Compact in Rwanda, where you were Minister of Agriculture. So you have a diverse experience of Caadp implementation in different ways. Can you share some of the lessons that you can see in terms of leveraging evidence to help in the domestication and the implementation of Caadp? Because implementation, of course, is the most important thing. Having a compact and a plan is one thing, but getting it into action to see results is crucial. Thanks, Agnes.
No, no, thank you, and good to be part of this conversation. There's a lot of work that has been done and that demonstrates the value of evidence in how we run business in government. But I guess what I really want to talk about here is the source of data becomes extremely important. If governments are the ones that are generating the data, one of the challenges we've seen, even as part of what Usman was presenting, one of the biggest challenges we've seen is it's very difficult for government to have quality data. At least in the last Caadp, we have had that major challenge, where bringing out quality data that can be tracked year after year, season after season, and be able to be used to generate good evidence for decision making has been a challenge for many countries, and reporting on data has been a major challenge. So that is one. Part of it is then, again, highly fragmented, but part of it also is because of poor investments in data generation, lack of financing. Data generation can be a very intense exercise, and if you don't have the right technologies, can even be a very difficult exercise. So we see that many countries have challenges doing that as well. I guess the biggest challenge I've seen so far when it comes to how countries use data or even generate data is the whole challenge of capacity, institutional capacity to be able to put in place the ecosystem that is needed for evidence generation, for data generation, but also the capacity to be able to interpret and understand and use data. That can be extremely complicated. And sometimes you find that the people that have the decision-making authority are removed from the data points, the places where the data is presented. So they are usually given synthesized information that doesn't include the most important points that you want to use as data synthesis points. So you see this a lot in government, where public officials basically get a paragraph summary, and that paragraph has basically dropped everything that was important. And just to give an example, Usman knows this, I mean, back in Rwanda, I ran a whole government program based on data that I got from IFPRI on where do we invest our monies and where don't we invest our monies. But it was not the only program. The government of Rwanda has invested a lot in the capacity for data. And because of that, you find it is one of the most efficient governments when it comes to use of public resources and get value for money when you're using public resources. So the capacity to understand the data, to interpret data, and to design pathways and strategies that allow you to actually have proper roadmaps that link to the results you want becomes extremely difficult. So that's something that as partners we must invest in. Now, sometimes data is also available and comes from other partners. The question for governments now really centers around interpretation and ability to interpret, but also the culture within an ecosystem and how well people understand the role and value of data and what you're trying to tell them. So you find that a lot of sometimes people just don't want to take data because there's, again, lack of capacity makes them feel suspicious. What are you trying to say? Why should I do this as opposed to this? Are you trying to influence an agenda that is different from what I would have done? And that lack of ability always really hinders the capacity of countries to take on data that is coming from other people. It prolongs the period between data availability and the time it gets to be used to generate action. Mm-hmm. But there's also political interest. There's political interest. Data may be generated and become available, but because it doesn't speak to the things I care about, then I decided to put it on the shelf and not use it. It might be that it is telling me that some of the things I'm doing don't make sense, and it is recommending things that I should be doing differently. And we've seen that. Mm-hmm. And I just don't want that decision because it's not in favor of what I would like to do. But sometimes also partner-generated data can be buried in lots and lots of volumes, and it becomes inaccessible for public officials. So how we present data and make it available makes it can also be very challenging for public officials to use. So we must think about, and then the last thing on data and how we get to use it is, I feel like governments sometimes are stuck with too many cooks in the kitchen of data and evidence. There's just so many people walking in and walking out and telling you how this data will do this for you, and then someone else, this data will do this, and just too many things. And again, forgetting that in some of these offices, we have people that don't have the whole capacity I was talking about, that don't have the ability to make a connection with what you're talking about, then it causes paralysis in the system. So a lot of lack of decision-making that we see in African governments, especially in some of these offices, is paralysis in the system. Not so much lack of data, but maybe even too much data, and inability to make decisions in real time can be challenging. That's why coordination among partners becomes extremely important. What are we telling the government? What data are we using? And who has what authority to say what? So we haven't been extremely good, even though one of the Caadp goals in the last Caadp was ensuring, and one of the things partners agreed on was ensuring good partner coordination. I don't think it worked as well as it should, and that does have impact on how governments get to work. So again, all that has affected how we use data. But again, there are very good examples of where countries have used the data have done a good job. I remember in Rwanda, one of the things we did, for example, is where do we grow what crop? This is not even something I did. This is something I found my country had already mapped out. And investments are done based on where we think it's most productive to grow maize. If it is not productive enough, don't grow it there, grow what grows there. That's just an example. Another example is investments in malnutrition in Rwanda are based on data that has come from local communities that show where there's the biggest data centers of malnutrition. And the government tries then to understand what could be. Sometimes it's even very difficult to understand why that area has malnutrition. But then that gives you a sense that you need to dig data and to dig a little bit deeper and get more evidence on what that means. All in all, what I've seen it does most, two things. When you use data, you really, really have the opportunity to improve how you deploy your $1. Number one. Number two, you get very good efficiencies from that $1. So sometimes countries that have little resources end up doing so much more because they are able to use it efficiently. So I guess that's something that we can all learn from.
Thank you. Some real deep insight from really having walked the walk in helping to implement this. So you make some really important points about data. Do you have any other key actions that you would advise governments and partners in terms of successful and accelerated implementation of Caadp? How do you get the momentum and keep it?
No, I think there are two things here we can look at. There are quite a few, but I'll just focus on two.
Mm-hmm.
Given the situation we are in today, geopolitically, all these challenges that have to do with limited availability of financing, I will just focus on two that really do touch on these two. We need to make sure, as we go into this Caadp, we need to make sure that every public dollar is put to the service of two important things. To really make sure that we are unlocking private capital, number one. Number two, that we are integrating public dollars. There's no point, there's no time anymore for fragmented investments on the ground that don't add up, that repeat the same things over and over. We don't have that luxury anymore. So if we can put every public dollar to do that, we've done some of that work. At AGRA, for example, we really did try to integrate different resources in places where nobody was investing. Mm-hmm. And what we did see is that for every dollar we invested, because we went there to pay for what nobody was paying for, it was usually extension, and nobody was paying for extension except us, or it was the ecosystem, bringing the ecosystem together and supporting the governance mechanism of those ecosystems. And for every dollar we put in, the private sector put in $12 because the private sector just needed the market. And we made sure that they have visibility of the market. We mobilized significant scale. So if you had significant scale, you have 300,000 farmers or so, the market is there for the person who is selling seed. The market is there for the person who is selling fertilizers. The market is there for the person who is looking to offtake. And we focused significantly on extension, just making sure that every farmer had visibility also of what was going on and they could tap into the ecosystem. We moved the businesses in, we were able to attract them to that ecosystem, and we were able to get things going. So for me, it's bringing that dollar together has to be that we are building an ecosystem, and that ecosystem can only be built by public money, especially when you're dealing with smallholder farmers. So that's number one. Number two, again, has to do with financing. For me, has to do with how climate change is an unfortunate, an unfortunate challenge that we live with. But there is an opportunity right in there that we could start shifting our policies, our way of thinking to tap into the climate ecosystem and economies that we do know exist. Today, there are so many people that are tapping into climate economies, but Africa is not doing that. I mean, I talk to ministers so many times and I say, we are going to do this work. That's at AGRA. We are going to do this work. We are going to invest in this. Can we work with you to design it right so that in the future you can tap into, investments of this nature, carbon credits? Because you can't come in much later. You need to come in now and design with investors. But people don't seem to understand what that means. Africa doesn't seem to understand what that means, at least not significantly enough. So if we started investing in attracting future resources by looking at what is it within the climate ecosystem that we can tap into, just like the rest of the world is, innovate, invest in data, invest in data systems that make us sound credible and look transparent when we do work. If we do these things, then there's a whole ecosystem around climate that we can tap into. And I just feel we are not tapping into it enough, at least from an agricultural perspective. So again, there's so much to do. But if I were to do two things, those are the two things I would do.
Wow. Thank you, Agnes. Your passion and your concrete examples are always so inspiring to show that things can be done and it can happen. But leadership is important in the process. Thank you, Agnes. We'll come back to some of your great examples. I see some questions in the comments already. Professor Anna Late, can I come over to you? So Anna is a professor at the University of Ghana, a member of Academia 2063's Board of Trustees, and she was the co-leader of and convener of the Technical Working Group 3 on food security, nutrition, health, and food safety. Quite a mouthful, with leading a group of around 78, I think, professionals who helped to provide the input into the Kampala plan. So as an expert in the field of nutrition, Anna, how sure are you that we're going to get this momentum in the beginning? And do you think the Kampala Declaration contains the elements to get the momentum we need to move that dial on nutrition and food security?
So thank you very much, Cheryl, for this opportunity. And I thank the organizers, academia, for inviting me to this. I think listening to all the presenters, I mean, they have laid down a great foundation for me to really respond to this question. But what I pick from all the presentations that have been made is that, you know, even though we say that agriculture is the bedrock for Africa, and if you look at the progress that Osman presented, you know, even though we have made some modest progress in the past 20 years, the fact still remains that we are not able to feed all our citizens. They don't have access to enough food. We can't even talk about access to healthy diets. We've seen the figures that have been reported. So this is really, you know, not very good. We've made some progress, but not very good progress. So what it means is that going forward, we really have to make some major shifts in the strategies that we have to be able to address the huge challenge of hunger and malnutrition that we are talking about. I see Kampala actually giving us the opportunity to do this. And what is so different about Kampala? I think the Kampala agenda is quite different because if you look at the vision of the Kampala compared to the previous Caadps, it says that we are looking at a vision of sustainable and resilient food systems for a healthy and prosperous Africa. I think this is a big change in the narrative. We have shifted from the narrow focus on agriculture to now a broader food systems approach. And with this approach, it will enable us to focus on all forms of malnutrition, including hunger, okay? And so I see this new narrative as, for us as a continent, like we are killing not one bird or two birds, but we are killing several birds with one big stone. That's the way I see Kampala. Even though like the persistence of hunger in Africa is unacceptable, and we must do everything to eliminate it, we should address the other forms of malnutrition like stunting and wasting and micronutrient deficiencies, which are all devastating human capital on the continent. So I think that the Caadp, if you look at, we have 5 objectives. And if you look at objective 3, we are looking at hunger and all forms of malnutrition, which is really fantastic. You know, it has expanded compared to the previous Caadp where it was so narrow. So how do we hope to see this change, you know, the changes we are talking about? What is Caadp going to do for us? You know, I see the food systems approach will require multi-stakeholder, multi-sectoral collaboration. Others have talked about it. You know, even though Caadp is traditionally a document for health, for ministers, agriculture ministers, at this point, Kampala should not be so. It has been developed, but it's something that should be inclusive. It should require the participation of all sectors. You know, the transformation that is called for by this strategy will require the involvement of health, the involvement of trade and finance, education, social protection, and strong partnership. This will be needed. And that means that at the country level, we will need the buy-in of everybody, you know. And luckily, you know, following the UN Food Systems Summit, many countries in Africa started looking at their food systems. They started looking at the challenges within their food systems. And I know in my own country, in Ghana, we held a lot of food systems dialogues where we looked at various sectors. What are the challenges and what needs to be done? So we have all these challenges. So I would say that, with the Food Systems Summit and the Food Systems Dialogues that were held in the various countries across Africa, we know the challenges. So we are not going to start Kampala from ground zero. We are going to look at our food. We have our challenges, and we can build upon it. And so whatever food systems pathways that countries are developing right now, they have developed pathways. Some countries are now revising the pathways, updating it. Okay, so we should have Caadp. We should make it align. We should make it align with Caadp. So Caadp should be something that countries should take up and align with their food systems transformation that they are now putting out. Thank you.
Okay, great. So you spoke quite a lot about inclusivity, about partnerships, and about getting the buy-in. What would you say are the priorities to get this kind of action moving?
Okay, well, in terms of priorities, one, which have been mentioned by others, is country ownership. Country ownership, we must see this Caadp and internalize it for our own, as some have used the word domestication. We have to that's the first thing we have to do. Now, there are also other priorities that must be taken into place. I talked about situation analysis. And in this situation, we said that most countries have already looked at the challenges in their food systems. So luckily, we can build upon this and move on. Other things that need to be done is that if you look at the Kampala Declaration, the agenda, there are 5 strategic objectives. It is important that we develop indicators and targets, that are measurable. These must be developed for each of the 5 tracks, and we have to use this to do monitoring and evaluation regularly. So this must be done for all the 5 tracks. What are the indicators? What are the targets we need to reach? That's a very important thing we need to do. We also have to start by identifying evidence-based low-hanging fruits. Sometimes if you look at the problem, it's so huge, you don't know where to start from. But each country, there are some low-hanging fruits that if we pay attention to them, we can make an input. So we need to identify these low-hanging fruits and see how we can build on them. We have the evidence that they work. They may not cost so much. And so let's look at those hanging fruits. Others have mentioned resources, and I can't emphasize this enough. Resources are needed. Human resources, financial resources, and infrastructure resources. And we've been talking about healthy diets all along. You can understand why healthy diet is so expensive, because there are no policies. If you look at the ingredients that go into healthy diets, most countries protect the staple crops like cereals and staples. But when it comes to things like fruits and vegetables, the policies around them are very porous. They are not strong enough. And so these foods are subject to food loss and waste. They end up at the plate very expensive. So we really need to look at how we can build infrastructure to protect and make some of the ingredients that contribute to healthy diets affordable. And then finally, there are many other factors, but for time's sake, the one I would mention is political commitment. Political commitment at the highest level. Just last month, we just had Nutrition for Growth in Paris, where many countries, presidents and ministers went to Nutrition for Growth and made commitments. They made commitments that they will do to address nutrition. I think that these commitments we must look at how to go beyond the dialogue. The commitments have been made. Now they've come back home. We need to hold them accountable. Let's not forget the commitments that have been made. We should use this commitment and get our leaders to be accountable to the commitments they have made. The commitment should not die out. Let's use this and link them to our Caadp and make the progress that we really want to make. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anna. Thank you. Maximo, Agnes, would you like to make any comments on each other's points, or can we move to some questions in the chat.
I can quickly. I fully agree with Anna and Agnes on the data and policy. I think it's central. There are enormous data gaps, and we need to work intensively with new ways of doing this thing and new ways of advising governments. On the political commitment, I think that will be central. No? One of the major challenges that we see is the variability of the policies being implemented in countries and the not sustainability. And this is getting into a limit because of the indebtedness that we have. No, so the level of indebtedness is at a critical level, and that clearly will require to have some certain stability. If you ask a private company why they would like to invest in a country, basically the only thing they would like to have is some stability, no, on policies and so on, so they can make choices over time. So I think achieving certain political stability in many of the countries in the continent have a clear commitment to avoid conflict, which is one of the major problems facing in the region, and trying to pursue agendas which are no more than one president, but 10, 20 years agendas, which is what is needed to create the transformation. That's what we need. And we need to find ways to bring more innovations and science using what we already have. No, so research and development will take 10 to 20, 30 years to move forward, but there is a lot of innovation already that can be used and can be accelerated in the region. So I always see as an opportunity the fact that there is so much space to improve, and that brings a huge opportunity to leapfrog and to do it. No, and that's what I think the region has to do.
Great, thank you. Can we move to one of the questions that links to the data? Kennedy asks in the comments, government agencies have bureaus of statistics. How can these bureaus be supported to gather and help with evidence-based data?
I think the biggest thing that we can do for Bureau of Statistics is to give them sufficient autonomy to be able to make decisions as number one, and collect the right data and use the right data for the right conclusions. Number two, equip them in terms of financing and human capital that they need to be able to do their work. So yeah, where we have those institutions and where we've seen them do a good job, a lot of it has been based on the ability to make autonomous decisions as institutions.
You think there's more to be done in that domain?
There's definitely a lot to be done in that domain. Well, maybe that's not even the number one problem. That becomes a problem when you do have those institutions. I think the number one problem is to have institutional mechanisms of collecting data, and National Institute of Statistics are some of those institutional mechanisms. In many places, they don't exist, and where they exist, they're not equipped enough.
Yes. Okay. Well, I'll wait to see if there are any more questions that would emerge. Can I ask you, so all three of you involved in national data, particularly on the nutrition data. Nutrition is often only collected every 5 years at a national level. So quite a number of the statistics that we rely on are data points that are quite far apart from each other. So one of the challenges in trying to determine whether the new investment strategies have an impact is that we have to wait for a while to get the data to determine if what we're doing is actually moving the numbers in the right direction. Any suggestions on how that situation could be improved?
So I think we need to. So of course, nutrition also takes time. No, the core indicators of stunting and so on is not something immediate, but there are indicators which are quick to measure and that can be measured annually. But then there is the hunger indicator, which is measured every year, as well as the FIES, the Food Insecurity Experience Scale. So if that indicator is moving in the correct direction, you will expect that the other indicators at some point will start to shift and move in the correct direction. So I think we need to work with all the gamma of different types of indicators. There will be a big problem because of the DHSs and the financial support to them. So even the data that is already being collected and was historically collected will be substantially impacted. Moreover, we know that the emergency data will be impacted because of Usenet and so on. And that is creating already a gap for next year. So this year we are okay, but for next year we have a big challenge. And right now we are trying to work how we can cover that gap. So data will be an enormous challenge in the next years. No?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we can start thinking about, Professor, maybe your students can be extremely helpful here. Maybe we can start thinking about how we use what we are doing today to predict nutrition indicators, AI and all that. If people are already using the pictures you're taking of insects or other pests, and they can already tell trends using AI and what type of infestations they're going to have, you can definitely use consumption data and start building models that can tell us what type of nutrition challenges we are going to have. So maybe it's something for you all to consider.
So we have indicators of pests and diseases. That's what you're referring? So we have early warning systems. So we have, in certain cases, we have predictive power. No? Like in locust, we now can predict 6 months in advance. In the problem of pests and diseases is that you have to be very careful. That's things that you cannot make public so easily because it could create problems, no, to the industry and so on. But there are the pandemic fund help a lot that help a lot to build those type of structures. But for example, all the transboundary money is stopped. Transboundary diseases, no, and that's super problematic, no. Because that's which could end into pandemics and problems. No?
So the big question would become trust. The more we shift to AI, are we going to have more trust in data, or are we going to throw more queries at it?
I guess it's a combination. I mean, AI can do all the predictive stuff that it will do, but and for us to gain the level of confidence we'll be looking for would have to be based on ground truthing and the ability for AI data to corroborate what is happening on the ground.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You have any comment, Anna?
Yes, I do have a comment, and I see this as something that we cannot leave off the table. You know, Africa is currently choking under a debt burden. I mean, basically, many Africans will tell you how much they are using in repaying their debts. And if we are talking about full systems transformation and all the things that we need to do, if African countries are not helped, you know, we will come back to where we are. We will hardly make any progress. African countries are choking under the debt burden that they currently carry, and something must be done about it. Otherwise, I don't see how we are going to make that fast progress that we are talking about.
Maximo, I assume you're watching the numbers very closely at the moment in this regard. Any comment?
No, I agree with Anna on the problem of indebtedness, but I think we need to be realistic. There won't be help. It's very clear. I think Africa will need to get their act together. They will need to find a solution to the problems. The help will be minimum. And we need to move forward on that, because if you hear what is happening, the IMF, which is the one looking at these topics, have very clear instructions on how they're going to move forward. Yesterday, there was a speech here on Treasury on that exactly, which will remove some of the additional things that the IMF was lately doing. Climate, hunger, gender is removed now from their work. And they are asking them to be harsh in terms of the way they used to operate in terms of macroeconomic policies. So I think, for example, I heard of a very good initiative that the African Union is doing with Zambia, and I think the president of Kenya, on valuing their capital, the natural capital. I think that those are the ways, those innovative ways are the ways in which you can reduce the risk of your investments by using as a backup that value of your natural capital. And that could help to reduce the burden of debt. But those are the ways, because right now the access to money for Africa is super expensive. If it doesn't come from concessional grants, doesn't come from NDVs or from IDA, in the markets, it will be super expensive because of their situation. So we need to find innovative ways of Africa to reduce those risks so that you can reduce interest rates and improve your access to the financial markets. But that's the crude reality that we'll be facing. I think I don't see too much of a chance to argue about help at this point. It could be I'm too pessimistic.
Good. So
yeah, on
yes.
leadership. Yeah.
Yes, go ahead, Agnes.
There's
Did
a
you want to
question
answer it?
Yeah, on the importance of leadership.
Yeah.
And pulls out some examples. I think there's no question, given everything we've been talking about, whether leadership is critical to how we drive agendas or not at country level. Leadership is critical to prioritizing some of these sectors that touch millions of people. Leadership are critical to inclusion. Maximo did present data that shows that inclusion is one of the biggest losers when it comes to what has happened in the last few years in Caadp and on the African continent. So that means we are impacting people that need support the most in negative ways. So it's really critical. That's where leadership then comes in and makes decisions that
Right, yeah, Agnes is frozen, I think. Are you hearing Agnes?
No.
Oh, sorry, Agnes, are you back?
She's frozen.
Ah, there we go. We can see you again. Sorry, you were making a most crucial point.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
No.
Yeah. No, I was just saying that leadership is very critical for us to make investments in priority sectors that only leadership can make. Say, for example, uplifting inclusion and making sure that it's an area that we need to invest in as a priority. Making decisions to make investments that will drive some of the things that Maximo was talking about in terms of resources and the development investment. But leadership is not only at the top, leadership is everywhere. And here people are calling, the person who said this is calling out something we call CALA, Center for African Leaders in Agriculture, which is a place that Agro has put in place to bring together private sector leaders and the public sector leaders at lower levels, probably not the highest levels of ministries, but really to help them and appreciate each other's problems and challenges and be able to work together to resolve those challenges. So we do feel like that's an opportunity to start creating expectations of leadership, but also to empower people, especially those who are leading in the private sector, to give them an opportunity to make the people that are making the most decisions that impact their businesses in the public sector. So that space was created as a mechanism of encouraging heads of departments in governments in the agriculture sector and related sectors and heads of private sector businesses to really come together and resolve challenges, and it's working very well. So we just need to create more spaces like that, and we need to continue nurturing leadership.
Okay, great, thank you. So one of the elements that's linked there, Kennedy's asking, how do we get government to actually put the budget for implementing the Kampala Declaration? Because these mechanisms to do so require quite considerable coordination across governments. There's usually no Ministry of Food Systems, just like there's no Ministry of Food Security. How do we ensure that governments actually put the money together and commit to rolling out these programs?
Maybe we should go back to Usman and ask him.
I can try a little bit here. This will require, of course, first of all, I think a really good and high quality domestication process. Actually, you will remember, Agnes, that the first Maputo Roundtable took place in Kigali. And the first compact was signed in Kigali. And the reason that it happened into the last day of the roundtable, there was a lot of resistance among some of the donors, not just to sign the compact, but even see Rwanda sign the compact committing 10% to agriculture. It was a huge, huge battle leading to that. And what changed the outcome in Kigali and for the rest of the continent was that the Minister of Finance stood up in that last day of the roundtable and said, I am going to sign this compact to commit my government to provide 10% of the budget to agriculture. And those who feel comfortable joining us can sign, and those who would like to sign the compact later can do so. And we had to suspend actually the session because many of the development partners they didn't even check with the headquarters whether they could sign or not, right? So if you open the tent and have a good domestication process that allow Minister of Finance and Planning, other part of the government to know this agenda and buy into it, you're probably in a much better position to get something like that happening. That's the first. And the second is, no matter how much the Minister of Finance and Planning would buy into this, they're not going to be signing a blank check. So the quality of the program, and you know that very well, you haven't sat there, Agnes, is the quality of your program to the cabinet. Your quality of your program also makes the weight when you get the funding from the Minister of Finance. So how we can work with the Minister of Agriculture to put forward really high quality, bankable or fundable projects that the Minister of Finance will see as being a good use for the scarce country resources is going to be very important. Thirdly, it would be good to show value for money as well after you have these good programs, right? So being able to track performance in a much more rigorous way and really, showing outcomes, not just, what you do, but what you're achieving as well in terms of relevant outcomes. Are you growing income? Are you making the sector more competitive? Are you raising yields? Are you improving nutrition? So just making a case for the money that you're using. All those three could help you generate the momentum towards more funding, but also keep more funding coming into the system. So let me stop here.
Good. Agnes, are you going to take a crack at it or add to what Usman says, or are you leaving him with a responsibility?
No. I don't think I would have said it better. So that was very good. Thank you, Usman.
Thank you. So yeah, the coordination is quite important, but it links again to the capacity and the capacity to use data and to be able to work together that was raised earlier. So yeah, can I do one last round of our panelists and also ask if our guests from the welcoming session would like to say anything before we move towards the closing remarks from you, Augustine. Agnes, Anna, Maximo, any final closing remarks about how we can learn from the past and make sure that the next decade is successful and achieves the Kampala goals?
Sorry, first the ladies, I will wait.
And so we go in alphabetical order. Oh, in that case, I
go your first, Agnes.
My last name or first name?
It's the same.
Okay. I think maybe what I would say here, first of all, to thank you, Usman, and colleagues for putting this conversation together. It's really, really important that we start thinking about how the next years will look like. I do feel like we were pretty suboptimal in the last 10 years based on what Maximo has presented. And maybe it's not for lack of trying, but lots of challenges. I guess what we need to prepare for is the challenges have started being even greater before we start implementation. So we are going to have to be a little bit more deliberate, more intentional and make sure that every dollar goes as far as it can go, and maybe even be able to do stuff even without dollars. So it will be good to see what we are prepared to do with or without money. And when we get the money, to make it go as far as we can, to be able to implement this Caadp, because we can't have another 10 years that passes by with more malnutrition and more food insecurity.
Thank you, Agnes.
Okay, so let me add to what she has just said. This is Anna. So yes, indeed, I see this new vision we have as a real opportunity for us to really do something about the situation in Africa. And we have put a nice document together on paper. Now we have to move to implementation. And this is where the rubber meets the road. You know, how are we going to implement it? And this needs a lot of thought. And I see all hands on deck. This is not a document for agriculture. It's a document, as I said, that should bring all sectors together, because that's the way we can move forward with this food systems new vision that we are talking about. And so as countries kind of take this document as their own, countries have multi-sectoral platforms formed through the food systems dialogue. They should use this platform and really see how each sector can contribute to making this a success. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Maximo?
No, look, I always use the Caadp since it was created and argue that Africa is the only continent that got into an agreement on targets and where they want to go and how they want to do it. You don't see that in Latin America. You don't see that in Asia. Every country goes by its own way. There are some potential coalitions, but they never have worked. And now you are continuing that plan. So that's a huge success. I think to have that institutionality in place is a huge success by definition. I think now the issue is that countries really will need to find ways in which they can start a serious transformation on how they use their resources, because there will be scarce in the most efficient way, as Agnes was saying, and also Anna, so that you get what you want. We can no longer expect that other countries will be there to back up or to support and to give you flexibility. I think it's the time to really take this as an opportunity to develop a transformation done by the governments, driven by the governments, and with their resources, and with the generation of their own private sector, which you have in many countries of Africa, super important private sector working today. And with a lot of evidence and intelligence behind, because what is happening right now is a huge opportunity in terms of trade. I see it as a huge opportunity of the division of the blocks on what Africa can supply to the rest of the world. And that's where they need to do it. And also inside Africa, interregional trade. You have the regional free trade agreement of Africa. You need to exploit that more. You need to have the standards, generalized standards, use the EFI across all countries of Africa. So a huge opportunity, I think, to accelerate the process. But if this is not taken in a serious way, without thinking, oh, this will be calm and in 4 years they will keep helping us, or in 3 years, no, that doesn't. I think that doesn't fly anymore. I think we need to be realistic and start from what we have. And if something else happens positively, great, you have more. But at this point, I will be very realistic and move with what we have and progress as much as you can.
Thank you, Maximo. Thank you to the panel for all your input and your insights into these challenges and how we can take the lessons we've learned into the future. Can I turn to Dr. Augustin Wambo, who's Director of Knowledge Systems at Academia 2063, to give us some key takeaways. Augustin, you've been listening carefully. Can you give us your insights? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Prof, for this facilitation. I think it's been very interesting listening to all these speakers. It's not easy in a short time to really give a summary of what has happened or what has been said. Very interesting submission so far. I managed to capture a few points that I'm sharing as key takeaway messages. The first one is that it was really important for us to come together in a platform like the one we are having now today, to take a moment to reflect and look into transitioning from Malabo into Kampala. is very pivotal because that gives us an opportunity to have forward-looking into what has happened in terms of implementing actions under Caadp, but also consider what next. What are the challenges that are emerging, like the climate change, conflict, and food insecurity that are still there that we are going to be dealing with for the 10 years to come. The second that I captured from the various interventions is that the Caadp was and continues to remain something really unique. In many ways, this is the case. It has not been seen anywhere else in the world. Africa has done it. It started as a political decision in Maputo, and technicians were now directed to make it happen, to make the vision take shape. And this is something that we have been able to witness, to see. We are not probably where we would like to be, we would have wished to be by now, but at least we're able to move the needle. Now, taking into account looking at the specific progress achieved, there is some good progress there. However, the momentum is slowing. We have to be aware of it as we move into deploying Kampala to the ground. Africa has seen significant growth both economically and in agriculture. Under Caadp, we have GDP that has increased, agricultural productivity and trade. But however, those performance indicators are showing some signs of stagnation. Should we be worried about this? Yes, probably, because if we are too comfortable, we might end up going off track. So we need to make sure that the momentum is not lost through to the Kampala agenda. The fourth is that ambitions alone is not enough. When we consider future strategies, this must be guided not only by ambitions at the highest level possible, but also we have to remain very realistic, very pragmatic, and tangible. Keep it real to the ground level. It's important to track ambitions as we've been doing under the BR, but that might mislead us by kind of shadowing the important achievements that are on the ground that we are not able to track properly, but also covering some shortcomings on what is happening. The fifth message is that there are some important lessons from Maputo that we may want to carry and harness into effective domestication of Kampala, both Maputo and Malabo. We have to make sure that the domestication is properly structured, is a process that is very structured, building on the gains or the lessons learned from Maputo. We are not saying that we should skip completely Malabo, but Malabo didn't adopt modalities that were as rigorous as those we implemented or we embraced under Maputo. So it's probably time for us to really take one step back and look at what made Maputo such successful in establishing the baseline. The sixth element is that yes, it's important to go very granular and have country-specific analysis because the only way we can make sure that what countries are committing to do in terms of the agenda that they set for them to align to Kampala, it has to be based on the lessons that the country has learned, on the trajectories, individual trajectory of the countries, looking into the strengths and weaknesses. Otherwise, we cannot come with a blanket recommendation for country A, the same for B and C, and expect that something else will happen differently. In doing that, we have to make sure that there is a great deal of disaggregation in terms of data. Otherwise, some key realities will still be hidden. We want to make sure that we are able to bring those to the fore. Seventh, data gaps are still a critical challenge that we have to face. It's probably time for us to prioritize investing in this, in the data systems, making sure that we can tap into the potentials of geospatial technology, as well as strengthening the local research capacities. This is something that we saw in the past. At some point, the momentum decelerated, but there's no way we can do without making sure that the proper data systems are in place and are delivering. Eighth, financing must be rethought and reinforced, especially with what we're seeing at the global level, with the new the new architecture of the ODA shaping up. We should be more concerned as Africans in looking into the opportunities that we have, domestic opportunities. How do we bring in key players like central banks? How do we make sure that commercial banks are more and more connected to this conversation by opening up the Caadp to include more stakeholders? We should be able to bring together all these players to look at innovative ways of local solutions to fund agriculture. Nine, stronger integration of food systems and regional trade. I think it is important to indicate that a food system lens is now very central in Kampala, where you have multi-sectoral integration, a sector's approach with integration of nutrition, climate change, trade, infrastructure, along with other issues that were there before. But we are witnessing an important change of narrative compared to Maputo and Malabo. 10, and last, policy will and leadership will have to be stronger than ever. Yes, countries have committed to the 6 commitments of Malabo, of Kampala, excuse me, but it's time probably to walk the talk. There's no way we can have such high-level political demonstration of high-level political will, and also we fail to demonstrate that we are really leading in the direction that we will be leading in if we want to be successful. For that, we have to be really deliberate and very intentional about how we take Kampala to the ground, making sure that it's there to really help transform the agri-food system that we have in countries that for the time being are really struggling. Thank you very much. Those are the 10 key messages I captured from the conversation. Over to you, Prof. Sharon.
Thank you. Well said, Augustine, and thank you for winding up and giving us a summary of the first Kampala Caadp series webinar. So can I hand back to Usman to give the closing words for this webinar?
Yes, Sharon, thank you, and for a great chairwomanship of this webinar. Well done, as always. So we are very grateful to have you with us here. Equally grateful to have the distinguished panel here, starting with Mr. Greco-Chair, Maximo Torero in the beginning, Agnes, and Anna. So thank you for your time and for joining us. And also thank you to the audience that has participated and stuck with us here over the last close to 2 hours. And more importantly, thank you for the very excellent deliberations, which I think enriched both the brief and the presentation. There are a lot of takeaways for us as we continue to engage on Kampala. I think in our discussion, as we look as to how we use the evidence we have to guide our decision-making and planning for Kampala, we are faced with 2 clusters of data points. One cluster points to levels and stock of where we are, and another set of data points to what has been the changes and where we are to take us where we are now from where we used to be. So both are extremely important. The level cluster of data around levels and stocks and situation tell us actually how much more we have to travel. But in order to know what exactly to do, it's important to look at the changes as well, the dynamics. That's where we can dig deeper to understand why this kind of dynamics. So we have to combine both in order to be able to learn and move forward. For Kampala itself, we are now ushering into a post-globalization and post-ODA world. So I think the weight on Kampala's shoulder is going to be even bigger than on Malabo and Maputo. So we will have to do a lot more in terms of domestic resource mobilization, but also domestic resource use efficiency to stretch what we have and to expand the purse of what we have. And there's room to do that, but it will take a lot of discipline and a lot of focus and political will to do that, but it is not impossible. There's a lot that could be done there. We also will have to pay a bit more attention about how to enhance competitiveness of our sectors into the more turbulent global markets, but also more importantly, in terms of claiming the fast-growing African market. So Kampala's interrupted agenda and trade agenda in general is going to be much more comprehensive than under Maputo and Malabo, just due to the circumstances today. I will close with the data challenge. All of us notice that we always are talking about data challenge in agriculture. And one can get frustrated easy to say, why is it so? But it is so because it's just much more complicated than in many other sectors. The agricultural chain is just too long, okay? From what you need before you get to the farm on the input levels, all the way to farm level, post-farm, post-harvest, processing, trade, consumption, it's huge, right? And in that chain, you have a host of institutions with different mandates and different focus for data. It is just really close to impossible to get these things done and done the way it should be. Even if each and every one of those institutions with different mandates were to do their work right, they'll probably be doing it using different frequency of data, different protocols, different data format. You may have covered everything, but it doesn't work together, it doesn't gel. So there's really a need to think innovatively and to be creative. And we had the opportunity to pilot an approach in Senegal, which we called smart cluster-based data system, which was to bring all those different institutions that in their day-to-day work deal with different things. We brought them together for a limited period of time to collaborate on a comprehensive data collection agenda. Organized around clusters of data, production cluster, consumption, trade, equipment, what have you, and then look at the best institution that is the best capable of carrying out that cluster to do that. They work together within 6 to 8 months to a year, and then they go back to business as usual. But within that year, you have a comprehensive data set from end to end, which you can use for several years. And they don't need to do that for, let's say, 3 to 5 more years to do it. I think that's the only way, or something similar, to really get a good, comprehensive, complete, coherent, and high-quality data set in agriculture. Luckily, you don't have to do it every year, because a good data set of that format can go for a few years that you can use for a lot of things, right? So we'll have to be more innovative. And the other opportunity here is AI and geospatial data. As I said in my opening statement, we have a whole department at Academia 2063. It's funny enough, they are running now the largest crop production forecast activity on the continent. 10 crops over 47 countries for every season, right? And there's no one on that team that is an agronom or understands anything about agriculture. They're trained as in physics, engineers, mathematicians, and informatic people, right? But they're using this new data system to do that. We will be able with that system not just to forecast production, but also to measure cultivated areas. A huge problem to forecast yields, but also you can delimitate plots. You can go into rotation. You can monitor crop growth. There's a lot you can do with these technologies, and they are actually accessible to most of our countries. It's really deep mathematics, and we have mathematical faculties across the continent. So I think most countries can really get organized in this geospatial and AI data to improve not just access to data, but granularity of data, timeliness and frequency of data. And that will take us to a whole new level. So we hope that Kampala will allow us to do that. We certainly at Academia 2063 will do what we can to move that community and grow it around geospatial data and AI and equip our countries in this new era of data-rich policy planning and implementation. So thank you to everybody who joined us here today. Thank you for your time. And we look forward to the next set of seminars in the same series, and very much hope that we will have you with us as well. So thank you, and back to Cheryl.
Thank you ever so much for those words, Usman, and reiterating the urgency for action and really clear insight as to what needs to be done from here. Thank you, everyone, for your participation and for joining us. And hopefully we'll see everybody in the next seminar. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.